They might be going to Netflix. I can't wait for these fights to freeze every 20 seconds instead of crashing entirely. Do we not remember Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson? Probably the biggest news in the UFC currently, because it can reshape the whole pay-per-view thing. And hopefully they do. Hopefully they get rid of pay-per-views. It's such an outdated model, and apparently, according to the reports, the ESPN is not happy with the pay-per-view numbers. ESPN is saying the pay-per-view numbers are quote-unquote way down. You guys think they're going to drop the price from $80? They might go down to $79. Which of you guys think is the best broadcaster to just play the fights, without them crashing? And with ESPN not being happy with the pay-per-view numbers of the UFC, it just goes to show what I said before. There are no superstars. Some people were disagreeing with me. Like, they were telling me, no, man, Alex Pereira is a superstar. And I was like, he's a star to us, but he's not a superstar. Like, the average person doesn't know who he is, right? If you go around asking random people, do you know who Alex Pereira is? I guarantee most of them would not. If you ask them, do you know who Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, Khabib, who are these guys? Most people know them. And it's not just Alex. There are no superstars ever since Khabib and Conor, right? Khabib was the last superstar of the UFC. And that hurts the casual fans, I guess, reception correlating to the lower pay-per-view numbers, right? So the casual fans aren't watching as much, according to the New York Post report. And if you look at the fight night quality, even hardcore fans are skipping some of these cards. Is our sport declining? Like, let's be honest here. Right? We talk about when the sport is doing great. We don't really talk too much about when the sport is declining because it doesn't happen too often. So there isn't a superstar for the casual fans. The fight nights have been lower quality. There's a lower level of standard for the hardcore fans. With how horrible these fight night cards have been, they're still in the apex for some reason. It feels very lazy. I mean, we used to have a crowded event for every card, but the fans are being conditioned to this lower standard. The refs don't deduct points anymore for anything. I mean, Michael Chandler hitting Charles Oliveira in the back of the head like a million times. You get like 4 free eye pokes. Same with low blows, same with grabbing onto the fence. And then what it seems like for every card, there's a robbery, right? The pay-per-views are still good today, but they're $80, right? They're more expensive than they ever were. Bro, it was nearly impossible to watch the Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev fight on ESPN+, and they're charging $80 for that. You have to subscribe and then buy. And they wonder why pay-per-view numbers are lower than ever. It's like, dude, in 2016, when Conor was at his peak, in his prime, fought 3 times that year, the pay-per-view cards were $60 in the United States. And it's like, in other countries, they were a fraction. Like, they're still a fraction of our prices. Everywhere around the world is cheaper than in the United States. And it's like, yeah, obviously the pay-per-view numbers are going to be lower. People are just not buying the fights anymore. They're way too expensive. And especially in today's economy, do you guys think the cards will be as good as they were during Fox? Because, man, I went back to 2015 and looked at every fight night card. And then I looked at 2024. And I'm just thinking, what happened? What happened to fight nights, bro? And all those better fight night cards in 2015 were in arenas with an audience. In 2024, and still onward, they're still stuck in the apex, bro. Can we get the fights out of there? That was supposed to be a temporary thing, and now it just feels like it's laziness. Like, yes, some of these knockouts and finishes are cool, but they would have been a lot better with an audience there. Like, dude, I've been watching since 2011, right? I've watched about 90% of the cards ever since. And to be honest, as a fan, given my customer review, the fight night quality has taken a nosedive in 2024. Now, some of the cards moving forward seem pretty good, like Leon versus Brady, and Moreno versus Urseg, Jamal Hill versus Killer Roundtree, Sandhagen versus Figueiredo, Josh Emmett versus Laurent Murphy. Get that out of my face. Like, a lot of the fight night cards moving forward seem good, but it's still not up to the standard that we were used to for anybody who was watching during Fox. Bro, during Fox, fight nights were peak quality. Championship fights, #1 contender fights. You get Marvin Vettori versus Roma Dolidze like 3 fights down from the main event, not it being the main event. Of course, not every card was like that, but that was the average common card where it felt like the fights mattered. These days, when you watch fight night cards, it's more just entertainment to see if there's some crazy knockout. A lot of these fights don't actually matter unless it's some fighter early in his career and then he eventually becomes champion or something like that. But that's very rare. Like, Vettori versus Dolidze is a fight between who's not going to be in the top 10 anymore, because neither of those guys are fighting for the belt. Neither of those guys are going to be in the top 5 moving forward. Bro, go back to 2015, right? Go back to 2015 and look at the fight night cards. I feel bad for the new fans that they never got to watch those cards live, and their standard is watching Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze and Marcin Tybura versus Sergey Spivak and Emmanuel Lemos versus Werner Jandiroba. Like, you get the occasional Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov. Like, bro, those kind of fights, Adesanya versus Imavov, was a lot more regular back then. The last title fight on a fight night card was like back in 2022, I think, with Davidson Figueiredo versus Brennan Moreno. 3 years ago was the last title fight. During the Fox era, they had multiple title fights for fight night cards every single year. Bro, I recommend everybody go back in 2015, look at the main events of every Fight Night card, and then look at 2024. It's not even close. It's not being biased, it's not being subjective. It was objectively so much better during Fox. And hopefully with Netflix, hopefully they bring that back. And honestly, I think a big reason for that is because there's a lack of competition. There's no pressure for the UFC to do better. They are MMA. They've taken over the entire sport, even though they're not technically a monopoly, right? Because there are other organizations. Those organizations nearly don't even exist anymore. You know, like they're tanking. PFL is tanking. They're not even allowing their fighters to fight. Like they're holding them hostage, essentially. One championship is going totally to Muay Thai now. Like they aren't even having MMA fights that much anymore. And for them, I think they should go that direction. I think once Demetrius Johnson retired, they really had no one left. Even Reinier de Ritter came to the UFC, you know? Like, dude, back when Pride was around and when Strikeforce was around, the UFC had to compete. Like, they had to actually make their cards as good as they can. They knew if they didn't, that people would watch Pride or Strikeforce instead, right? Competition between organizations is a very good thing because it increases the quality of the cards. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that the UFC made was lowering the quality of the Fight Night cards. Because the Fight Night cards are for the hardcore fans. Like, we're the ones who are watching this, right? Casual fans are going to be watching Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze. That's for hardcore fans. And honestly, a lot of hardcore fans are skipping on some of these Fight Nights with how consistent low quality these cards have been. There are some good ones, but the standard has dropped. And the reason why they do that is because they think the hardcore fans are always going to watch every single fight. But there comes to a point where the hardcore fans start to skip cards. Bro, people were saying, if you're watching Manel Kape versus Aso Almabayev, you have no life. And I heard the same thing about Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze. These are like the average headliners of Fight Nights. I never used to see hardcore fans say that they're going to skip Fight Night cards. That's the biggest blunder that the UFC made. They're losing their hardcore fan base. The hardcore fans is the core of the UFC. It's what keeps it afloat. Because now they only have casual fans, who are the most fickle by definition. They don't watch every card. They don't care about all the fighters. They only care about the big superstars, or just the big stars in general. That's going to require the UFC to constantly have stars fighting. Then what happens to the Fight Nights if they lose the hardcore fans? In an extreme hypothetical, right? Let's say they keep going that route and gradually the hardcore fans starts to dwindle and decrease. Then they lose the entire hardcore fan base, right? Just hypothetically. They have to throw away all the Fight Nights and go back to when they used to do like one card a month, one card every other month. In my opinion, the best move the UFC should make is cater back to the hardcore fans. Because now they don't even have the superstar for the casual fans, and their Fight Nights are low quality for the hardcore fans. Like, nobody's happy with the product on average in general. There are a few cards that are good, but you look at the average Fight Night in the last year, a whole year, bro. Like, I can look at every Fight Night of 2024. I don't think I have to, but Uncle Ike vs. Walker. Okay, that's decent. Dolidze vs. Imavov. Jack Hermanson vs. Joe Pyfer. Brandon Moreno vs. Brandon Royval was good. Jairzinho Rosenstrike versus the GOAT Shamil Gaziev. Okay, alright, that's a good one. That's a good one. No, I'm kidding. Like, what? Tai Tuivasa vs. Martin Tibora. Amanda Ribas vs. Rose Namajunas. Aaron Blanchfield vs. Menon Fura. Okay, I guess I didn't mind that one. Brendan Allen vs. Chris Curtis. Matthias Nicolau vs. Alex Perez. I like the fight, but as a headliner, Derek Lewis vs. Rodrigo Nascimento. Edson Barboza vs. Lerone Murphy. Jared Cannonier vs. Nezhny Imavov is a good fight. Right, that's decent. Alex Perez vs. Tatsuro Taira. Then you have Robert Whittaker vs. Ikram Aliskerov, which was supposed to be Hamza Shemaev, right? So that was going to be a great one. That was a good fight night. Then we go to Rose Namajunas versus Tracy Cortez, which was originally supposed to be Macy Barber versus Rose Namajunas, and then Amanda Lemmelsh versus Vern Jaroba. Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov was a good one. Bro, Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi have all the good fight night cards. Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov, Whittaker versus Aliskerov, like they have the best fight night cards. And then after that, you get Marcin Tybura again versus Sergey Spivak. Jared Cannonier versus Kyle Barral was good. Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady's decent. And Nato Moicano versus Benoit Saint Denis. I like Nato Moicano, but come on, man. As a headliner of a fight night, bro, we used to get championship fights on fight night cards. #1 contender fights on fight night cards. Then Brandon Royval versus Tatsuro Taira. Anthony Hernandez versus Michelle Pereira. Brendan Moreno versus Miro Bazzi's decent. Neil Magny versus Carlos Prates. Peter Yan versus Davis Figueroa was a very good one. That's another good fight night card. And that was in China. And then Colby Covington versus Joaquin Buckley was a very good one. So, what is it like? You can count on one hand how many good fight night cards there were last year. Bro, the fight night quality took a nosedive in 2024. And apparently it's supposed to be the best time to watch the UFC. Says who? Now, of course, the UFC's not dying or anything, not to exaggerate. They still have some good fights. The pay-per-view quality is still good. And of course, we're all going to still watch. It's just, as a fan of the sport, you want to see it do better. You want to see the product to be better. You want better broadcasting without the app crashing. You want the fight nights to be better. The officiating during the fights to be better, because that's actually impacting the fights themselves, which is the worst part of it. Like, they do not want the fights to be affected by all that foolery. I think the UFC is going to be better. I think the quality is going to increase. Maybe with Netflix, it'll be better, but we'll see.